Why did I say it like that? Hello, my name is Rachel. Welcome to the book club. Vampires are my special interest book club. That is what we're doing here today. We are a vampire-related book club. Generally on Sundays, we read... You know what? Stop bugging me. Turn it... Do not disturb. Vampire anthologies, collections of short stories, because that is the easiest to dodge angry people who are mad about any copyright issues, though I haven't had any issues so far. That's why we do that. Every Sunday, Eastern Standard Time. Is there any other part of the intro? We are reading today Under the Fang, edited by Robert R. McCammon. You can find it on Goodreads if you would like. Though I do need to switch over and start using, I think it's called Storygraph is the new cool thing. I need to make an account. So you could probably find it on there too. I don't know. I haven't gone on there. So good luck with that. Came out in like 1991, I believe. And my copy that I'm reading is falling apart. The cover is literally like, every time I open this thing, it's like, it's probably gonna fall off this time. And it hasn't yet. This thing is resilient. Yeah, sorry if I seem a little bit scattered. I kind of am always scattered, but today I am in pain. It's not a great day, and I am sorry about not streaming last week. Medusa, who is screaming at me currently. Yeah, Medusa was sick last week, and it lasted for a couple days, and I was very worried. She's better now. She's just as annoying as ever. Shoo. Go away. Shoo. Shoo. Yeah, if I think of anything else, I'll say it. But vampires, book club, short stories, sick cat. I have a hot water bottle on my back and it is making me so sweaty. I'll try not to comment too much about being in pain. Okay, may as well start. Oh, and an important aspect of this book that we are reading, Under the Fang, it is a horror. It is horror genre. Every story is horrific horror. It all varies, obviously, but there will be mentions of rape. There will be outright rape scenes. There's death, blood, guts, gore, fear, issues with consent, animal harm, and animal death. I personally will not be reading any like outright rape scenes. I will gloss over anything erotic, and I will gloss over anything related to animal death and harm. I cannot stand animal pain. I just can't. So yeah. If this is too much for you, fair enough. We just finished a book with all of the short stories from the beginning of the 1900s, so they're all very like sterile in comparison to this one. If you would prefer, go ahead and watch them. They are still up. Thank you for being here regardless. And the first story, hold on, I have a new system. No, yeah. Okay. The story is called Does the Bloodline Run on Time by Sidney Williams and Robert Petitt. Content warnings for rape, pedophilia, and slavery, but I will gloss over all of the explicit details. Just a heads up. I'm not going to have a content warning on all of them, because they're all kind of... You'll see. Let's just start the story. Scatterbrained, like I said. Okay. The dream had been like black silk, soothing and soft as a sheet over his tortured brain, but slowly something had seeped through to his subconscious. First a vague and shadowy sense of unease. Then he felt the fear, and the silk transformed, became burlap. It was not a sheet any longer. It was a shroud, or something that had once been flesh. It was no longer without shape or name. He knew, and it made and it almost made him scream again, even as he guided the Harley deeper into the fringe, trying to push the thoughts from his mind. Once dreams had been a refuge, but he had discovered earlier as he had slept in preparation for tonight that was no more. Now, as he watched the sun dying behind a ridge of bleeding clouds, he knew he was dealing in nightmares. He rolled the Harley into the deepening shadows between rows of raised buildings, letting the darkness conceal his form. Night was coming, black and inevitable. The bastards loved the night, but he had learned long ago not to let the fear control him. He shoved the kickstand down with the worn sole of his boot, settled back in the saddle, and ran a gloved hand over the grime and stubble on his face. His looks hadn't mattered in a long time. If any fangs saw him, they wouldn't ask questions, even though he wore the armband with the blood-red variation on the swastika emblazed in bas relief. If any of his fellow bearers of the Nazi-like cross spotted him, they would know why he was here. Nobody ventured into the fringe unless they were trying to make contact with the resistance, or unless they wanted to die, or worse. The only people he wanted to find him knew where to look. They were the most dangerous of all. He glanced around, taking in the destruction that marked the boundary of the fringe, no man's land. Yet many still walked here. Medusa, please. Medusa. She's interrupting. Hold on. Come here. Come here. This is what you get with our book club. The occasional screaming of a child. What do you want? You're annoying. You are. Oh my God. Can I pet you and read? I have things to do. We're in the middle of a story. Yeesh. Okay. Alright. What the fuck? The only people who wanted to find him knew where to look. They were the most dangerous of all. He glanced around, taking in the destruction that marked the boundary of the fringe. No man's land, yet many still walked here. Those who were brave enough, the resistance, those who didn't care anymore, the ones like him who worked for the vampires. The light clink of metal on stone made him turn to find a group of figures materializing around him. They were dressed in black like he was. The irony was enough to make him chuckle. Once the fangs had stalked the shadows and cowered in the darkness. Now the good guys wore black and ventured out in the night, their activities concealed in shadow. Dugan? He hadn't expected a woman's voice. As she stepped close enough to be seen, he was surprised to find how sensual and beautiful she was, with lean, fine-boned features and glossy black hair clipped into a smooth frame for her face. He'd seen many beautiful women, but none with the air of strength that this one exuded. The women he'd known the last few years had all been quivering with fear or staring at nothing, either aware of where they were going or beyond caring. "You must be Quicksand," he said grimly, "and you must be the one who hauled so many women to the fangs." He kept a stoic expression. "I've seen the error of my ways." He didn't want her to see what her words had done to him, but deep inside himself he could feel their sting like a razor slicing through the tissue of his soul. He knew what he was, or had been. A procurer, charged with luring women in for the fangs, a pimp for vampires. They had a preference for beautiful women, and they liked to do more than drink their blood in the brothels where they kept them alive on diluted plasma, where the women endured night after an endless night of torment and torture, where perversion upon perversion was performed on their unwilling bodies. He'd seen the vampires and the young girls beneath them. He had watched the fangs rise from the two white naked flesh, the vampire faces covered in blood, their dead black eyes filled with ecstasy. And he had done nothing, felt nothing, because, deep inside, Dugan believed himself to be as dead, as damned, as the undead masters he had served. Felt nothing until he had accidentally walked into Bellathari's chambers, to find the vampire writhing and shuddering in the final throes of a lust kill. Lust kill, the ultimate experience for a vampire. It was a status symbol of sorts, an in-joke twisted from the legends that they could only survive on virgin blood. He'd heard them laugh and brag about it, those lucky enough to have found a virgin. The girl had been Belthari's sixth, though it was Dugan's first to witness such. Later he had sworn it would be his last. And then there's like half a page of description that I'm not going to read. Use your imagination. None of my business. It was over in seconds as the blood was drawn from inside her, and then Belthari rolled away from the corpse. He grinned at Dugan, obscenely smacked his lips, then, as if in an afterthought, a frown puckered his forehead. Well, Mr. Dugan, are you going to just stand there and admire me, or are you going to take out this garbage? Shocked, sickened, and numb, Dugan did as he was told, lifting the frail form as if it were weightless, feeling the warmth leaving the body. He carried her from the room without looking back. He didn't want Belthari to see his tears. The next morning, he made his first venture into the fringe, leaving a message behind. He relived it all in a heartbeat as the men with quicksand forced him against a wall and searched him. He's clean. He stinks, but he ain't packing, a big man with a thick accent said, Cajun, from what Dugan could tell. I'm not gonna do accents. Just for anyone new here, you don't want me to do an accent. See? It was a mistake. The Cajun, who was almost as big as Dugan, made a swipe across the biker's cheek, the backhand blow striking so hard it sent him to his knees. Before he could move, the others were on him, fists striking glancing blows against his ribs and face. They opened a couple of cuts on his cheeks, just enough to sting. Then one grabbed a fistful of hair, jerking his head back so that he was forced to look up into Quicksand's face. How do we know you weren't sent to set us up, scum? I guess you don't, but I'm sick of them. I sent you the information on the train. How many girls have you helped them kill, Dugan? You don't even know, do you? He didn't respond, didn't flinch. His eyes never wavered from Quicksand's, like I thought. So why give us the train? To make yourself feel human again? Again, he gave no answer. Don't try. They turned my sister into one of their playthings, Dugan. One of their harlots, as you'd call them, I believe. They used her up, but they didn't burn the body, god darn it, and she came back. She came back to see me, gray flesh over skeleton, hideous. You know what they're like. I had to kill her, to set her free from that torture. I still can't sleep for wondering where I sent her soul. You swore you'd get even. I swore I'd kill every fang and every human shitbag that helped them. The way I see it, our mission can be fulfilled, right here by having Gaston slit your throat. The Cajun grinned. You need me, Dugan countered. For information on a mythical bloodline, some underground train that may not even exist. It exists, Dugan said. I've seen it, and I'll think you'll want to stop it. Why? How bad can we hurt them by just stopping one load of refrigerated blood? The train's not just carrying blood tonight, Dugan said. What's it carrying, then? Gaston asked. Dugan spat blood from his mouth and pursed his lips to clean away the saliva. Tonight, it's on a harlot run. The silence that fell over them rivaled the night's blackness. For a moment, it was as if they had turned to stone. Dugan stared into Quicksand's frozen eyes. 20 or 30 girls, he said. They'll be blood food inside of 2 weeks, or you can set them free. What's your price, Dugan? Amnesty from fringe prosecution. That's all? Cajun asked. And a place in the resistance. You're joking. You? A turncoat? I have personal reasons. The Cajun's eyes clouded with new anger, and he swung a huge hand toward Dugan's face. It was a haymaker right, but Dugan sidestepped it, slamming an elbow up and into the man's nose. The blow was hard enough to bring tears, though Dugan checked the force to avoid breaking cartilage and driving bone fragments into the brain. Still, he drew blood. The big man struggled to keep his feet. They killed my daughter. She was only 14. Ooh, connection issues? Stop having connection issues. If I just say that, that will make it come true, will it not? Sorry. By the way, that's supposed to imply that the lust kill that I skipped over was his daughter. No spoilers, but it's supposed to imply it because that was the 14-year-old he saw get killed that way. Anyway, his voice, some tiny waver of emotion turned distrust into a flicker of understanding. Finally, Quicksand nodded. I believe you, she said. She looked to the big Cajun. Gaston, bring the van. Hold on, I'm having issues. Connection issues. Again, I do not know why. How are we going? How are we doing with this? How do I sound? I don't know. I sound okay. I seem to be okay. I'm gonna keep going. It's not receiving data for the stream. Thank you, YouTube. Stream is healthy. Continuing on. Sorry for that. Shrug. I don't know. I believe you. Bring the van. Revenge, Gaston muttered as he spat some of his own blood into the asphalt near Dugan's feet. That I can understand. She nodded toward the other men who had stood back a few steps. They had the silence and discipline of ex-military men. This is Edgerton and North, she said, just so you know who's going to end your life if this is a hoax. How much time do we have? Dugan checked his 3 hours. Then we'll make it. We have to. Sure do. Dugan rode his Harley, leading the black panel truck through the debris and rubble of what was left of homes and businesses. The route into the fringe led downtown. It began getting worse, much worse. Dugan's fear began to grow. He was no longer worried about meeting the human guards, so the armband made little difference. The fear gnawing at his backbone was of a different type. Here was the evidence remaining from the frenzy that had swept the city when the change had come. Each place had been different, he had heard. Here they put up a fight of sorts. Here in the place where the chaos began, the pits. The stench wasn't as bad as it once had been in the beginning, where mankind still maintained a vestige of hope, when they piled the bodies of early victims into mass graves, when tanker truck after tanker truck dumped thousands of gallons of fuel into the hastily excavated pits, when the sound of sizzling flesh and the snap of seared bone held communion with the flames, skyscraper high. Yes, kitty. Do you have to shoo you away? Get out of here. Get out of here. It had been an unending battle. At last, a losing battle. They came back from the dead in hordes, faster than the bodies could be burned. Until the end, when the keepers of the flame gave themselves into the pits, their choices made, a preference for death rather than to become the undead. Patrols avoided the area, for there was talk of things that were neither dead nor undead, neither human nor vampire, but combinations of all. They roamed the death pits. They fed on decomposed flesh, drank the blood of rats, attacked human guards and resistance fighters alike, but they cringed back into the shadows. The vampires walked the night with arrogance now. What a master race they had made. Dugan glared at the armband, felt its significance deep in his gut, and ripped it off, throwing it far from him. They were approaching the subway entrance near Hyde Street. He pulled over and checked his mirrors, making sure the van followed suit. It did, and North and Edgerton quickly piled out carrying dark metal cases. Gaston came around the van doors armed with a hunting bow and a large quiver of wooden arrows. Dugan eased his weight from the bike and opened the saddlebags, where he removed a small crossbow and a dozen wooden bolts. He then moved to the van. "You guys work like a unit," he said. "We have to," Gaston said. "We work at night. Don't want to end up like them." He didn't elaborate on the last statement. Instead, he bent into the van and slipped a cane from beneath the carpet. It looks like a common walking stick, but twisting the end, he unsheathed a finely honed blade. After checking its edge with a gentle touch of his thumb, he replaced it. Paused to drink some water. Okay. Quicksand joined them, slinging a narrow wooden spear attached to a thong over her shoulder. She reached inside the van for the last item and grunted with effort. And he checks out her butt, and I have no interest in reading that. She froze him with a glare, and he stepped back. "I'll get it," she hissed. She jerked the handle and staggered away, Dugan following her with his gaze. "Hard-headed, isn't she?" he said to no one in particular. "Only around shitheads," Gaston replied. They moved into the darkened entrance of the subway before turning on lanterns. After crossing the tiled floor, they reached the turnstile where the bulky equipment boxes presented another problem. Quicksand didn't complain this time when Dugan offered his help. "What is this?" he asked as he passed it over. "If it works, you'll find out. If not," she said, shrugging, "you won't need to." They stopped at the edge of the tracks. Peering into the darkness, the lights from the lanterns would not penetrate. They heard only their own breathing. "Which way now, fang lover?" Gaston asked as he gripped Dugan's arm. "Screw you," Dugan said as he jerked his arm away and set a course along the dead railway. "We go down to the lower sets of tracks. There's a switching station there. It's like a large cavern, and it's the place we can stop them." "What have they done here?" Quicksand asked. "They incorporated some of the existing tunnels into their railroad network, from what I was told. It's amazing what you can do with it. They blasted new tunnels to take the line off in the directions they wanted. How extensive is it now?" "I don't know. Only the vampires to move underground. Down here, it's always midnight. They can travel any time, but they do most of it at night because that's still when they're least vulnerable. So they're not as arrogant about the resistance as they pretend to be." Dugan shook his head. "Not hardly." The bright beams of the lanterns shoved back sections of the dark, cutting a wild trail through the tunnel. They had traveled about 200 yards when Dugan located the narrow opening that had been chiseled through cinder block by human slaves. The path downward was even more narrow and infinitely rougher than anything they had passed earlier. I need a thing to help me keep my eye on this sentence I'm reading. It was a maze lined with steam, water, and sewage pipes, electrical conduit, and debris. "I thought it was the road to heaven that was rough and narrow," Gaston said, grunting under the weight of his burdens. "With the vampires' rule, if hell was easy to get to, everybody would want to go," Dugan said. They picked their way along the trail until it abruptly opened out on the edge of a vast cavern. "Does the bloodline run on time?" Gaston asked, looking down through the pitch black which concealed the track, even beneath the powerful lantern beam. "Close enough," Dugan said. "We better get ready for it." Gaston eyed him for a moment, his dark black eyes searching for some sign that Dugan was lying. "If you're setting us up, I'll kill you myself," Gaston said. "And you won't die easy, Cher. I don't think he's calling him Cher, though. Cher. Why am I guessing? I don't have anything to guess. What am I doing? Dugan offered no response. Beside him, Edgerton. This hot water bottle is boiling my brain. Beside him, Edgerton and North were unfurling coils of nylon rope. After anchoring bolts into the rock, they dropped the rope down into the cavern. Without speaking, they donned vests equipped with explosives and climbed down into the dark, rappelling with practiced ease. the lanterns on their belts bouncing spots of white against the rock. While they were climbing, Gaston and Quicksand opened the metal cases and began setting electronic detonators, small handheld boxes with short antennas to send their signals of destruction. You may wind up killing the girls instead of helping them, Dugan said. Either way, we'll be doing them a favor, Quicksand said. Aren't you the one that can testify that there are things worse than death? He checked his watch as he thought of Anna, remembering days he had ridden past the private school when she was very small. He had longed to go to the fence, to speak to her, tell her who he was and hold her. The restraining order Pam's father had obtained had prevented that. Later, when Pam remarried, he had lost track of them both, until he had walked in on Bellathari. See, that was his daughter. Woohoo, you're welcome. And again, he felt like weeping. It would have been nice to be able to cry, to let the pain go, not just for her tortured soul, but for the souls of so many girls, for the souls of everyone who suffered under the fang, under the freaking fang. The sound of the train burst through his thoughts, the racket clattering through the hollow caverns like smothered thunder. It's coming, Gaston said. We've got to blow the track now, Quicksand said. They can't get past. We may not get another chance. Gaston picked up his walkie-talkie. Bring her up, boys. We're going to have to blast it. Hurry. On our way, came North's voice in response. A moment later, the ropes began to jerk while the train's roar increased, carrying through the cavern an even louder clamor. Gaston and Quicksand began tugging at the nylon lines, helping the men upward at a quicker rate. Dugan noted that Quicksand was in a strain and jumped to help her. She spoke to him through clenched teeth. Dugan, you bastard, it's early. He ignored her and took the rope, grunting under the weight he was hauling. Just get the detonators ready, he shouted, trying to make himself heard above the din of the onrushing train now filling the cavern. If we blow it before the men get to the top, the shock waves could kill them. As soon as they clear the top, Gaston shouted. Leaving Dugan on the rope detail, Quicksand picked up the small boxes and armed them. Tiny go lights set into their surface gleamed to life. The train's momentum seemed to vibrate through the stone all around them. At the far end of the cavern, the locomotive's powerful headlamp began its sweep from side to side. Pull, Quicksand screamed. Just then, North cleared the rock edge and rolled toward cover. Oh, it was like rolled toward over. What? And rolled toward cover. Gaston moved to Dugan's side and helped him with the rope, tugging it swiftly as sweat poured off his forehead. An instant later, Edgerton scrambled over and quickly ducked behind some rocks. Hit it, Gaston shouted as he dived for cover. The blast followed in a second, creating a cloud of flame that rose up to the vaulted cavern ceiling. The moment she flipped the switches, Dugan grabbed Quicksand and they rolled over a pile of debris, his body a cushion for hers as the impact came. Then he covered her form with his own as rock and dust showered down on them. Several moments passed before things began to settle, the concussive waves resounding down side tunnels which served as bafflers. Quicksand began to cough and push upward, urging him away. He eased his weight from her and she stood, found his eyes for just a second. Thank you, she said. Don't mention it. He watched her move back to her equipment, her lean form flawless in its grace. For a moment he felt a stirring, something that had not come in a long time. But he then forced the thoughts deep down inside him, buried them. Maybe after this was over. Maybe. But not now. Pauses to drink some water. Mind you, I am rolling my eyes. She approached Gaston. We shouldn't have been pressed this fast. Damn it to hell. We're making do, Gaston assured her. We're in this shit up to our necks right now. I might not know how to swim, but I can darn sure fight. Get ready. Here she comes. The train rounded a curve. Its blinding white light, like a fallen sun, bathed the cavern. The brakes had already locked. The wheels offered up a banshee's screech of impending danger. Sparks and pinwheels and rooster tails danced off the metal. Around the blast area, the tracks were twisted like pretzels, and the huge fissure yawned like an open mouth, waiting to suck the train into its greedy black maw. The engine nosed into the cavity, and the abrupt halt sent shock waves rippling back through the other cars like an uncoiling bullwhip. The heavy metal boxes crumpled as they slammed into each other, jumping the tracks left and right back along the rail. Gaston reached into one of the containers and pulled out an Uzi. The bow already dangled from his back. He nodded at Edgerton and North, and they began the descent back into blackness, down to the catastrophe below. He followed a moment later. Can you rappel? 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 I don't know. Quicksand asked. I sure can't. I can climb down that rope if that's what you're asking. She offered him a pistol for the guards. He opened his jacket and drew out his own weapon, a near-antique .44 automag, a big silver cannon. I guess that'll do, she said. Can you handle the case? I can try. She helped him strap it to his back before they started down. When they reached the cavern floor, guards in white uniform jumpsuits were emerging from the wreckage, fanning out with machine guns, preparing for the assault they knew was coming. They didn't have long to wait. North and Edgerton moved among them, their laser sights flashing narrow rays of red through the darkness, the reports of their weapons an angry, echoing staccato. Yeah, that's how the letters work. The first wave of guards were cut to pieces, but more came, pouring like ants from a disturbed nest. Running past the fray, Dugan and Quicksand climbed aboard the first car they could access, up the outside rungs to the top of the train. Its length stretched back through the jagged cavern, flames providing light to show the twisted metal ruins of tank cars, some of which had ruptured, spilling their plasma-like contents onto the rock like some bright red-orange psychedelic artwork. Does all that come from humans? Quicksand asked. Human blood is at the base of it, Dugan said. Lots of human blood. The girls? They could be in any of the cars. We've got to find them. They ran as quickly and as cautiously as possible along the top of the cars, leaping across the gaps between cars. It was a little like a catwalk in a carnival funhouse because the derailed cars twisted at different angles. Need some water. They had traveled about half the length of the train when a sound, overriding the crack and roar of intermittent weapons fire, caused Dugan to freeze and look about. Smoke roiled and billowed in black clouds, and the flame continued to lick up around the cars, seeking something as fuel to continue life. He was about to continue moving when the vampires dropped, screeches of anger and human hate wrenching from their throats. They were pale, the skin which stretched over their bodies, bloodless and almost translucent. The makeup designer for Nosferatu must have seen this type of vampire for his inspiration. Their heads were bald, their teeth long and pointed in front, and their eyes piercing orbs that almost glowed, affording them full vision even in pitch blackness. Dugan knew them for what they were, the not quite dead humans. Not completely transformed into undead, they had fled the pits and come here, their transmogrifying bodies adapting for their new surroundings. Vampire missing links, he muttered. This cavern must run through a pocket of them. One of the creatures lunged toward them, but in a sudden sweep, Quicksand brought around the spear, impaling the creature. Its weight forced it down onto the shaft, producing a sucking sound, like a stick being poked into mud. A sick and gray-green fluid poured from its mouth, and for an instant it remained alive. The glowing eyes filled with more hatred and rage, and it let out a cry half of pain and half of rage before it was still. Swinging the weapon to the side, Quicksand used her boot to push the creature off into the cavern. 2 others dove before she could prepare herself. Dugan tackled one, drawing a crossbow bolt from its sheath to drive it up and deeply in between the monster's shoulder blades. He kicked the corpse away and saw the other clawing at Quicksand as she tried to get the spear in a position to stab. Ripping the case loose from his back, he slung it around into the vampire's side. The creature squealed and turned on him, jaw gaping, the black, jagged rows of yellowed fangs like those of a tiger. Dugan was about to move toward the thing when another dropped behind him, pinioning his arms to his sides. He struggled to no avail as the hot breath touched his throat. Quicksand came forward with the spear, shoving it into the first monster's leg, but it ignored the pain as it went for Dugan's head and jerked it sideways to aid its brother in finding the jugular. The arrows whisked silently to their marks in almost split-second intervals. The monster holding Dugan relaxed its grip first, and then the other was frozen in space, a thin shaft protruding as if by magic from its chest. Dugan kicked it over the side and pushed the thing off his back so he could turn and face a grinning Gaston. "You left without me," the big Cajun said with a grin. "Looks like you throw a great party." For a moment, Dugan was silent. Finally, he gave a nod and a quiet thank you. It was all he could muster. Moving to Quicksand's side, he helped her up before retrieving the case. Their eyes met briefly, and something touched somewhere inside them. Unexpected and dead in an instant, but there nonetheless. Quicksand pulled away, letting Dugan take up the case. "Come on," she said. "We've got to find the girls." Sorry, sighing at the pathetic attempts at romance. Gaston yanked out a flare and scratched it to life as North and Edgerton moved ahead, taking point. The path they followed a serpentine twist through the darkness. Serpentine? The sleek silver dining car, once part of an Amtrak, nestled almost cozily in the line between 2 tank cars. While others were buckled and crumpled, it had remained basically secure. Dugan dropped to the ground and yanked the automag from his belt. It kicked twice, the heavy slugs ripping through the chests of the human guards who had positioned themselves outside the door. They fell back against the front of the car, their bodies leaving streaks of blood oozing down the shiny metal surface. Stepping between the dead men, Dugan aimed the pistol at the door clasp and blasted it away. The door fell open from the impact, swaying and creaking, then hanging limply from the latch. Dugan moved inside on his knees atop the red carpet, the big-bore handgun extended before him. No guards waited, only a solitary figure in an elegant armchair. The rest of the interior was as posh as a Victorian sitting room, from royal drapes to the velvet lounges. The vampire's slender form was clad in a silk smoking jacket, with a lavender cravat in place at his throat. His choice of a small silver crucifix mocked the legend. His hands rested on the chair arms, fingers long and slender with sharp, manicured nails. His mustache was pencil thin, and his iron gray hair was slicked back over his high forehead, but it lacked a widow's peak to complete the effect. Otherwise, he had recreated the film and literary vampire image with perfection. Dugan had watched him for a long time and knew how he sought to be the elegant European count, fulfilling some fantasy or personal image of grandeur he had never possessed before. He seemed not at all disturbed by what was transpiring around him. He clasped his hands in front of him and let his red lips spread into a smile of greeting. "Ah," he said, "the resistance." He welcomed the others as they stepped inside. "You really don't know what a pleasure this is for me. Please excuse me for not having dressed more appropriately, but I wasn't expecting company." His eyes, focused on Dugan, glimmered, and his eyebrows raised. "Et tu, Dugan? Such an awkward circumstance for a meeting. I am sure we can rectify that shortly." "Who the hell is he?" Quicksand asked. "I am Anthony Bellathari, purveyor of pleasures, and I must add," he paused, eyes drinking in her beauty, "it is my pleasure to make your acquaintance. I hope we can come to each other on a more, shall we say, intimate basis." "You bastard," Gaston muttered. Must you be so vulgar? The vampire asked. Dugan raised an arm to hold Gaston in check. Come, I realize I am being a poor host. Let me offer you some wine. You'll join me? He rose from his chair. No? Then I'll drink alone. He moved toward the narrow bar at the side of the room. Gaston pushed Dugan's arm aside and lifted his bow. Stop right there. The command was ignored as Belethari set up a glass. Where are the girls? In the last car, but that shouldn't matter to you, as you won't be leaving. Gaston lowered the bow and unsheathed his sword. I'm going to cut his free... Exciting, the vampire said. Like something from a novel. But you are not a Texan, as Stoker mentioned, and you won't have the chance. As if on cue, the car jarred slightly, then again as light thumps sounded through the roof. All eyes turned upward except Belethari's. He poured a glass of dark red liquid, held it up in a mock toast, then inhaled it. Elixir. More thumps above. Now the vampire glanced upward. Cave dwellers, he explained. A step above the guards of your ilk, Dugan. Much closer to the master race. I fear you will not fare very well against them. He smiled and sipped the drink. You'll never see daylight again, he mocked. Sand shouted. Open the case. Dugan flipped the latches, opened the lid, and she was quickly jerking the bulky weapon free of its cushioned security. Dugan caught a glimpse of wires and tubing and coils before she pulled it away. The doorway was suddenly filled with a huge gray form. It was almost 8 feet tall, and it ducked through the opening and shambled toward them. Another filled the vacated space. Okay, I need a little moment. Yeah, monsters. Gaston leaped toward the door, sword drawn and swinging. A talon raked across his face. Blood began to spill over his eyes, but he brought the blade up into the creature's gut, ripping flesh open. The greenish blood began to seep out around the internal organs as they tumbled forward. Another was through the door, then another. North and Edgerton fired arrow after arrow, piling up bodies in the entrance, but the monsters dragged their dead companions aside as quickly as they fell. Belethari's laugh rayed throughout the carnage. Quicksand then flipped switches on the machine and it hummed into life. Coils glowed and she aimed it at the doorway. What is it? Dugan asked, fitting a bolt into the crossbow. Ultraviolet light. The vampires can't stand the sunlight, it fries them. This duplicates that light into a concentrated beam like a laser. It works? We'll see, won't we, Dugan? Great, he said, as he loosed a shaft into the heart of a creature clawing Gaston. I'll say now is the time to give it a try. She swung it toward the door and yanked the firing mechanism. Nothing happened. It has to warm up, she said. Dugan stepped forward toward the enclosed battlefield, joining Gaston in the struggle. They tried to hold the creatures at the door, hacking and stabbing them. Belethari came at Quicksand and then, no longer laughing, his fangs bared, his face a beast-like mask. Dugan! She screamed. He spun, saw what was happening, and loosed a shaft without taking aim. It caught Belethari in the throat. The vampires clawed at the sliver of wood in an effort to jerk it free. He fell to his knees, continuing to tug, even as the arrowhead ripped at his flesh. Something nudged Dugan's arm. Gaston's sword. Then it was in his hand, and he was advancing on Belethari, the sound of hissing arrows and collapsing bodies behind him. He saw only the vampire, felt only the sword in his hand. I am from Sarrantonio, Texas, and so was my daughter. We'll keep the image intact for you. Remember the Alamo. The sword came down, and then the vampire's head teetered, then fell, a gusher of black blood spraying the room and its occupants. Gaston cursed, and Dugan turned, not in time. 2 of the creatures had the Cajun, 1 on each arm. I wonder why. Maybe because he gave you his sword. Why did he? You already had a blade. Okay. Before Dugan could move, they ripped Gaston apart. one arm sliding apparently easily from the socket of his shoulder, and one leg separating at the knee. Gaston screamed, knowing there was nothing that could be done. Dugan charged them at an as an insanity seized his mind. With the sword, he hacked the creatures apart in a frenzy of slashing blows. Get out of the way, Dugan. It was quicksand. She held the weapon now, and a thin, pinkish-purple beam shot forward to burn through the monster at the back of the line. The creature's abdomen was eaten open. The light seemed to work like acid. As she moved the beam upward, it continued to split the creature's chest and face. The ribcage separated, and the gray organs inside turned to ashes. Get the girls, Quicksand said. Drawing the auto-mag again, Dugan led North and Edgerton as they ran back through the cabin. Firing at the rear latch, he moved through the doorway and opened the next compartment in the same manner. 2 guards were dropped by the weapon's blast also before he eased forward and up into the next car. The rear car was dark and stuffy. The girls huddled on the floor, quivering with fear. Some of them had been bruised and shaken by the accident. Others were dazed with the fear of their circumstances. We've got to get out of here, Dugan said. Come on. They complied with his order, some of them screaming or making other sounds as they moved. Quicksand appeared with the weapon still raised, but she lowered it when she saw the girls quivering, dressed in drab white shifts which were neither sensual nor seductive. Okay. If they were, would you have said something about the size of their butt? They were shaken and confused, and in moments they had all moved out of the car and were huddled together. We'll never get them up those rocks, North said. We won't have to, Dugan said, nodding toward the access tunnels exposed by the blast. Those probably lead to the surface. Did you know about them? I've heard them mentioned, but the vampires are cautious. Besides, do you want to try to climb down through a nest of those things back there? Shin gave his answer. At least now with the weapon we have a chance of getting out that way, Dugan said. But the trip through the tunnel was uneventful. It was narrow and rugged, but it was no longer guarded. The humans had fled, and if any cave dwellers remained, they apparently had no desire to travel toward daylight. The group emerged from the subway in time to greet the dawn. The girls, in their white robes, looked as if they had been headed for a convent or some other holy sanctuary, rather than to a pit of torture. Leaving Quicksand and Dugan together to guard the girls, North and Edgerton went up the street to use the radio unit in the van. A short while later, an old city bus rumbled to a stop in front of the subway station. We better move fast, Edgerton said. We might draw one of the patrols. Cramming the girls on board wasn't easy, but soon it was loaded and moving. North and Edgerton followed in the van, leaving Quicksand to ride with Dugan. Climbing onto the bike behind him, she rested her head against his shoulder. He knew they weren't safe yet, but still, her head against his shoulder felt good, peaceful. He allowed himself to relax. She had agreed to ride with him. Maybe she felt something too. Maybe he could work with her in the resistance. Maybe... A second later, her nails tried to rip through his jacket, and he felt her mouth trying for his throat, her tongue searching the pulse beat at his jugular. He jerked forward and threw himself to the ground, kicking the Harley one way while rolling the other. He came up, bouncing to the balls of his feet and clawing at the pistol tucked in his belt. It might be enough. Somehow, Bellathari had gotten to her, even if she hadn't been aware of it. In the sunlight, she shielded her eyes, her mouth ripping open in a snarl that revealed the new-formed fangs. Her flesh was suddenly gray and pulpy. She was changing. He fired the weapon, but the slug tore into her abdomen without effect. Before he could make another move, she had turned and scrambled down through some debris. She had gone into the pits. He stood for a long time, his heart throbbing in his chest. He wanted desperately to feel something, anything. He searched deeply inside himself, but it was only emptiness that he found. End of that story. Does the bloodline run on time? How do you guys feel about that one? I'm a snarky, cynical asshole, so my opinions aren't necessarily nice. Let's see. It's a good setup for a movie, but it is like a quintessentially, damn it, like a 90s thing, right? We've got this anti-hero main character who's done some really awful, terrible, unforgivable things, but he's ready to be a resistance fighter, even if he knows he will never truly be a good man. I think it's interesting that pre-vampires taking over the world apocalypse, that he's also had a restraining order taken against him so that he couldn't see his baby mama or his child. Like, what was he doing that they had a restraining order against him? Interesting that this is the main character. I mean, it's pure anti-hero. I'm not saying it's wrong. It does make him an interesting character. Interesting can be bad or good. Either way, I'm kind of neutral on it. But the thing that did make me roll my eyes the most was the whole, like, forced, like, romance with him. And was her name Dead Lady? Quicksand. It's fine if he sees a pretty lady and he's attracted to her, but what I thought was the more annoying aspect was she's possibly, seemingly the leader, if not highly respected in their resistance group. And at every turn, the moment he met her, he was always running over to help her lift something, throwing his body on top of hers to protect her, always running when she called, being there before he said it. Like, he was, like, protecting the woman. He was helping the woman carry heavy things and fight off the enemies. And it's a little bit like, she's lived this long without you. It's cool that you want to help her. I don't know. It's just a little bit sexist. That's all I'm saying. Overall, it's fine. I think it'd be a fine 80s movie. It'd be fine if it was a movie now. I do really like the aspect of him being an anti-hero. With a freaking, supposedly a record, or at the very least, a restraining order against him, against his baby mama and his kid. And those are the thoughts that I have. Do I have any more? Shaking any out? Not really. No. It wasn't like the only person who, not the only person who died, but the first person to die was the black Cajun guy. Okay. I see you. All right. Second story is Red Eve by Al Sarrantonio. There we go. Hold on. I need water. I wonder how many stories. These next two are pretty short, so we're probably not going to hit the normal 2 hours of streaming, but it's going to be close. And I'm still in pain, so that's fine. Ending a little bit early may be sad for other people, but I'm in pain and I want to go to sleep. Okay, Red Eve. It was Red Eve. Red balloons rose. In the glass city, between the glass houses, beside the glass walkways, from the glass towers and glass highways, red balloons rose. Darkness was falling, fell. Below, through the darkening thick clouds, the earth could not be seen. In the clear, high air above, the stars were sharp and cold. It was Red Eve, and winter was coming, and the children pushed their red balloons into the air to mingle with glass and stars, singing, as they always sang. I'm not going to sing this part. Red Eve, the night of blood, no blood we see. Balloons release, the earth below is dead. It was Red Eve. In Eidolon's palace, red balloons rose. Red balloons bounced playfully against crystal ceilings, tapped along glass walls like soft fingers, bumped into one another. The dining hall was filled with them, rising together from some secret compartment in the floor, light gas filled, coming to rest like a bobbing blanket against the high glass dome. Darkness and the sight of thousands of other red balloons outside, all lifting to hide the burning bright diamonds of the stars themselves. "Where is our teacher?" Mondrini asked languidly. I'm going to try to keep these names straight. Okay, Mondrini asked languidly as he pinged it above the rest of them. For a moment, the rising balloons obliterated his spectacle, but then secret windows in the clear palace dome swung up and open, and the balloons were gone into the night air as Mondrini's painting flowed and burst into even greater combinations under a ceiling of ascending red. "Yes," said Verdigris, yawning, pausing with the thought in the middle of playing his newest composition, a thing of electric body waves with notes dancing from his fingers. "Where is she? I'm beginning to get bored." He continued his music, his hands spinning quarter notes into the air to mix with the color beads of Mondrini's paints, forming a swirling mix of sound and color. Darnella, courtesan supreme, darkly beautiful, only nodded her head while lifting another choice, rare meat to her red lipsticked mouth. They ate, they drank. Mondrini and Verdigris finished with their pursuits, along with La Fortina, poet who had been doing something with Darnella's chest. I don't want to say that. While reciting in a whisper into her uninterested ear, joined the table. "This year," said Colomon, political leader, fat and hearty as Roman, she promised her finest lesson. He paused to dip his thick fingers into the plate before him, lifting another bloated shrimp into his mouth. "Yes," said La Fortina, taking his lips from Darnella's ear, "and I can't believe she would disappoint us." "I don't know," Mondrini sniffed. "The last year or two, I've found Eidolon to be a bit," he waved a hand searchingly in the air, "pedantic, tedious," Verdigris offered, stifling another yawn. Mondrini nodded, and Colomon, ever the diplomat, began to say, Now. But at that moment the room darkened. "I hope," came Eidolon's soothing, silky voice, "you won't find me boring." In the darkness, great vistas rose around them, mountains and rivers, the roar of crashing water, a great round moon rising magically slow over the ceiling above. "Wonderful hollows!" cried Mondrini, and from the table came other cries. "Yes! Yes!" The holographs vanished, the room lightened, and someone cried, "Eidolon!" She appeared from nowhere, from the floor or walls, from the same hidden box that held the balloons, becoming emplaced near Mondrini at the head of the table. She was slim and long, hidden only by thin shifts of red silk. Her face and hands were white and unblemished, her hair deep black, her voice soft as her skin. "Eat," she cried. "Drink." Her robes shifted, slitting to show perfect white breasts, slimming down to a perfect flat belly. Okay. Her hands closed over her ribs. "I pray," she said, "you won't be bored." "Hurrah!" shouted Mondrini. He rose unsteadily to his feet, one hand with a red wine glass. "To Eidolon, teacher par excellence! Hurrah! Hurrah!" from the assembly. At the head of the table, Eidolon's red mouth smiled slightly, her perfect head bowed in thanks. They ate and drank, ate. The 5th course was passed and belched, the 6th devoured, tongue of bird, wing of bird, head of bird. The 7th and 8th not so much eaten as absorbed through greasily wet fingers and hands. Mouths were slicked with blood and fat, wine and liquors. Colomon leaned back into his pillows and cried, "Ah!" as the desserts arrived. There were airy whipped froth things, red cherry-topped, crimson chocolates delicate as bone china, confections so light they melted reaching the mouth. Second dessert came and went. Third dessert, parfaits, red cream with redder cream, red berry tarts, came and went, and then there was more. Apple, red apple, essenced, milled, liquored. This is by far the finest meal, Coloman began, but he was interrupted. Now, La Fortina said, lifting himself unsteadily to his feet with the unsteady help of his neighbors. He spoke in a blur. Give us your finest lesson. Now. Hurrah! Came the slurred chorus behind him. Others tried to rise from their cushions, hampered by drunkenness and gluttony. Eidolon held up her hand, staying them. As you wish. Eidolon's fingers fluttered, and the hologram moon overhead brightened to almost painful intensity. It was brown and white, artistically cratered, not the gray, pale, distant, bomb-cratered circle they knew, outshone by some of the stars, night, silent, dead. This moon tugged at them, at their eyes, their hearts, made rhythms in their blood. This, said Eidolon, is my lesson. Her voice was the voice of this moon, pulling at them, making them hers. For a moment, the moon blinked out, leaving them with a gasping view of the red balloon still playing out through the clear glass walls from the other palaces surrounding them. A black night sky waltzing with rising balloons. The moon blinked back on. The ceiling, the night disappeared. This, Eidolon said in a gentle hush, is my story. La Fortina pushed himself up, pointed a finger at Eidolon, at the moon. Your finest, he insisted. You promised. Swaying slightly, he turned his finger downward, pointed through the crystal table, the glass floor, to the roiling, dark, sickly yellow clouds that hid the earth. This year you promised your best, better than this moon. We're tired of the same old Red Eve lessons. We're sick of the vampire wars, of dead earth below, poison gas, proton bombs, stakes through hearts, screaming men. We're tired of boogeymen with fangs, reflectionless images, children hung like beef for living blood, the battles for the moon. It doesn't entertain us. We're bored with the 1,000-year-old histories, the slaughter in Asia, the night of 1,000 impalements, the building of the crystal sphere, the deadly climb to life, the story of the last stake. It's old and tired. Children's story for a children's holiday. We're tired of this tedium, and we want better. We want your finest lesson. Yes, Mondraini demanded. Your finest. Here, bravo, added Verdigris. Eidolon regarded them with a hurt look. My friends, she said, spreading her hands, smiling slightly. Did I not promise? Hurrah, Coloman shouted. I told you she would please us. Please us now, La Fortina demanded. Yes, Mondraini added, and he was joined in chorus by the others. Hold on before she starts. I need to shift something around. My water bottle is cooling down. I need to move it. She's gonna get to a story, and it's gonna be so good, you guys. Okay. Yes, Mondraini added, and he was joined in chorus by the others. Now, tell us. Even Coloman's fat face flushed with demand. Tell us. Eidolon bowed. Of course. The world went dark. The moon returned, young as a baby. It pulled at their limbs, at the very earth. They were in a valley at the base of a black, cave-mouthed hill. Green, wet forest carpeted away from them to fang-like mountains in the distance. The air clung like hot, wet skin. Wolf shapes crawled close to the land, watching with guarded eyes. There came a chanting in the air. It was their own music, all of them. Mondraini and Coloman and La Fortina, the damsel Darnella, bare-breasted at their lead, face blackened, arms rising and dropping hypnotically in time with Verdigris's drum. The bonfire roared up before a cave mouth. Its heat lashed out. By its light they regarded one another's savage faces. They were possessed. They followed as the wild Darnella circled the bonfire once, twice, again. A wolf howl skipped toward them over the craggy line of mountains. The woods shimmered like stickmen dancing, throwing shadows, orange and black. Darnella halted. The music ceased. The drum became silent. Even the fire did not dance. Darnella's hands went high. Why didn't I cross that? Why would you tell me that about her? Stop bringing up her boobs. I have no interest in her boobs. The last beast, Darnella sang. I'm here for vampires, not breasts. Sorry. The last beast, Darnella sang. The bonfire leapt, licked at the air once more. They rose, bearing torches, and Verdigris began to beat his drum. Tam, tam. They entered the cave. Rock walls narrowed, widened. Their shadows danced. Follow, Darnella whispered, and they moved deeper. Verdigris's drum, tam, tam. At the rear of the cave, marked with bones and the head of an animal stripped bare, its horns pointed at them, was the path they followed. Warmth assaulted them. The walls were alive with drawings, headless men and animals, dancing bones, bodiless, fanged mouths devouring children and women, dark, winged shapes, dangled down. There were symbols on the path, bones stacked one atop the other, crossed branches. As the path sloped steeply, the walls became infested, every inch drenched with etched, bloody eyes and claws, genitals, severed limbs, hands and fingers, heads with stiff, bulging tongues. I think I said stiff. Heads with stiff, bulging tongues. The floor was sanded white with bone dust, splinters of bone, faint sounds, low laughter, the cries of birds, echoed, flew away. The earth swallowed. They went down, down. Tam, tam. Stop, Darnella hissed. The sudden opening pushed them into a low, wide room. There were rough, sagging rock walls, black with age and gravity, a ponderous ceiling heavy as the moon outside, a floor bleached and rough as ash bark, covered with grinning skull jaws. Darnella whispered in awe, "The last beast. Tam." Verdigris stopped hitting his drum. In the center of the room, within a circle of guttering torches, sat a pallet holding a bound figure. Twig-thin arms strained fiercely against the leather thongs binding it. Long, naked legs were thin almost to the bone. The toes on the feet showed nubs of bone at the ends. The waist and chest were sunk into its body, giving a hoarse bellow of breathing. The bare, hairless skull head showed the permanent wild hollow stare, rictured grin of starvation. They approached. The thing on the pallet whipped its head around, hissed, opened its foul-smelling mouth, showed its thin, forked tongue, two frighteningly long and white upper incisors. The last, beast, Darnella whispered. The others, gathered close behind like children, repeated their chant. Verdigris beat weakly at his drum. They slowly encircled the body. The thing on the pallet screeched, beat against its bonds, tore its bone-long fingers at the air. Its eyes bulged from its head. The last, Darnella said, bending down close. The thing snapped at her, hissed, cried. Now, Darnella said, reaching behind. Mondraini snuffed the head of his torch in the floor, broke it in half, handed it to Darnella, who gripped it in both hands, raised it high. The thing on the pallet shrieked, tried to move its sunken chest aside. Now, Darnella said. Verdigris beat his drum hard, tam, tam, as Darnella brought the stake down to the heaving chest of the thing on the pallet. It sank in and through. The body convulsed. Its mouth opened impossibly wide, the head arched back. A cry escaped, the eyes straining for something unseen, the fingers clutching at oxygen, bone ends meeting, clicking together. Tam! Verdigris stopped beating his drum. The thing on the pallet expelled breath, sank into itself. Darnella and Colomon Mondrany and the rest reached in to tear at the heart. Darkness came, covering all around them. And then, Eidolon said gently, 1,000 years went by. Darkness retreated, leaving them elsewhere. The moon was back over them. There were clouds, light and high as blankets, scrolling across it, making it peekaboo. They were on a street of houses. The night was sharp and cold as a cut apple. Street lamps made trees dance with night color. Leaves, brown, gold, apple red, spun down like parachutists, filling the gutters, dervishing the sidewalks, whipping like racers onto porches, circling jack-o'-lanterns before settling with a sigh. The air was filled with shouts and growls. They were howling, costume beasts on a sidewalk, their ankles brushed with leaves. They ran, keening, waving paper bags with handles down the length of the street. Their faces were beast-masked. The moon winked down at them. Something hot was in their veins, a dim memory of fear, a tapped source of the night and season, and they whooped and jumped and watched the leaf-shrugging leaves and grinning pumpkins. They ran in the costume night, and then someone reared up from behind a tree, a tall black shadow with wings. They drew up short and clung to each other, gasping. The thing spread its cloak. Its ghastly white face grinned, red lips parting to show long, tapering, night-hissing incisors. They screamed until one of the fangs, soft wax, fell from the plague ghoul's mouth. The thing turned and ran, laughing, bearing its candy bag toward the nearest house, porched invitingly in yellow October light. They laughed and followed, until Eidolon spoke gently. Darkness cloaked and uncloaked them again. The street, the costumes, the October night, all were changed. They heard real screams approaching. Again, the moon blinked on above them, this time bathed in red. The smell of copper pushed into their nostrils. The very clouds seemed to bleed. They were together, running, and everywhere they ran there were suddenly blood, in the gutters running like rainwater, splashed against the trees, bright patches against the sides of houses, on porches, before front doors. The night was copper red. Lawns were red. Streets were red. They smelled red, touched red, breathed and tasted, heard the sound of dripping red. Blood fell like acid, pumped into the sky from open hearts, open throats. The canvas of the earth was painted red. The moon arched across their sky like a time machine, crescent, half full, half crescent. Each time it paused, it was redder. The years rolled in front of them, and still they ran, unable to banish the taste of blood from their tongues, the sight of blood from their eyes, the sound of dying blood from their ears. Copper, crimson, blood garnet was the earth. The moon ran overhead, east to west, again and again, faster, faster, vainly seeking to break free from the awful, awful spectacle of earth below. High up, the moon froze in place. They watched its crescent light up in deep red. A booming, bright thud felt down to the earth, followed by another, yet another. The moon became sick and distant, gray and dim. There were more booming crimson thuds, close by, the boots of God slamming craters into the earth. The earth filled with something more than blood. The yellow clouds came. The cries of men were mixed with other cries. Plutonium stakes thrust through irradiated hearts. The earth began to die. Verdigris, Mondrany, La Fortina, Darnella, Colomon, they ran on. But now a wondrous sight appeared. The sky was filled with spun glass. A billion spiderwebs of crystal pierced the yellow clouds, hardened above, connected, spread, and melted together where the air was thin and clean. On crystal ladders, Verdigris, Mondrany, La Fortina, Darnella, Colomon climbed to a new world. Crystal glass waited to succor them, bathe them, nurture them, feed them. Below, they heard the last screams fade. The yellow earth burned, dying, sealed like a bottle forever, trapping the screaming shells of a billion last beasts, drops of irradiated blood drying on their lips. Darkness cloaked. And, Eidolon's voice said in a gentle coda, another 1,000 years went by. The moon snapped on above them. For a moment they blinked at its pale, distant form, thinking it unreal. Then they blinked wide, saw themselves in Idoline's crystal castle, seated before her crystal banquet table. A new course of choice delicacies was set before them: red cheeses, vermilion desserts. New liquors rose like the sun from below. Scarlet, maroon, ruby set themselves on the table. Outside, red balloons rose high, a diminishing blanket. The last chant of Red Eve went up as children sang, making their way home to crystal beds. Red Eve, the night of blood, no blood we see. Balloons release, the earth below is dead. A distant children's cheer went up, the sky filled with the final soft blanket of balloons, lifting red kisses to brush the unblinking stars. The moment ended, the children were gone, the holiday over. Idoline stood patiently at the head of the table. No one spoke. Then Mondrini, seated to her left, spoke. That story was, he began, and then he yawned. Now, Coleman said quietly. Impulsively, he reached for a thin goblet of plum liquor, suspending it between two of his plump fingers. You must admit, he said, as if trying to convince himself. The timing was exquisite. The hollows were redundant, La Fortuna shouted. Fortina. He rose unsteadily to his feet. Nothing new. The same old trees and beasts and moons, the same old vampire wars. I must say, Darnella said, baring her breasts to study them drunkenly, those hollow boobs left something to be desired. Desired, yes, said Verdigris, reaching across the table at Darnella, who slapped his hand curtly away. Boring, La Fortina pronounced. He sought opposition. Verdigris merely nodded. Mondrini, more emphatic, cried yes. Even Coleman, flustered, hid himself in the ruby dessert before him, pretending not to hear. Okay, water. Boring, La Fortina repeated. His face was flushed with anger. He attempted to stand straight, found himself swaying into Darnella, who steadied him until he clutched the table for support. You've bored us for years with your lessons, and tonight, after promising your finest, you've given us, he swept his hand overhead, where the last red balloon, high above the crystal palace, the crystal world, darted itself against the star-speckled night before winking out. Nothing. I was not entertained or enlightened. I was fed and made drunk, but your finest is nothing. A hush dropped upon the table. Even La Fortina realized the immensity of his insult. He sat, finding the center of his chair with difficulty, and drew the closest goblet containing the closest liquor, a blackly red, almost custardly thing, to his lips. Your lesson was, Coleman began sheepishly, glancing sideways at their hostess, who continued to stand quietly at the head of the table, a bit tired. But Idolin replied in the lowest, most gentle of whispers, My dear Coleman, I never said it was finished. What? La Fortina exclaimed. A general gasp from the table was followed by a shout from Mondrini. Bravo! Hurrah for Idolin! That beautiful timing. The hollows ending with the end of Red Eve. But the lesson not over? A wonderful ruse! Hurrah! There came a round of huzzas, followed by another round of huzzas. Somewhere between cheers and La Fortina's stuttered apologies, Mondrini proposed carrying Idolin through the streets upon their shoulders, which would have been attempted had they not discovered drunkenness tying them to their chairs. Instead, toasts were offered, more liquors swallowed. Idolin waited patiently until Mondrini shouted, So, continue. Yes, cried Verdigris. Go on with the lesson. Your finest, Mondrini added. Hurrah! Hurrah! Shouted Coleman, as Fortina stared sullenly into his empty goblet. Of course, said Idolin, bowing. They waited for the darkening of the crystal palace, the brights. Oh my god, the poor cover of this book. Sorry. Anyway, they waited for the darkening of the crystal palace, the bright sickle of moon, the hollows, the trees, the caves, but nothing happened. Instead, Idolin stood quietly. Ha! Cried Fortina. Here's your ruse, Mondraini. There is no more lesson. Mondraini looked from La Fortina to Idolin. Well, we need no hollows, Idolin said. What? Mondraini began, but quietly, patiently, Idolin continued. I gave you the lesson in hollows, but you didn't learn. So now I will tell it to you simply. Where did we start? 1,000 years behind 1,000 years. The last beast destroyed, until 10 times 100 years later, the memory of it has become a children's holiday. And then the beast returns in strength, and only the combined force and viciousness of man can wipe it out, along with his own planet. What follows? Another 1,000 years of tranquility, resulting in memory once again dulled to children's games. What lesson does that teach? You're a fraud, La Fortina shouted. There is no more lesson. Have you wondered, Idolin went on, lifting her hands to embrace the immensity of the space surrounding her? The airy depths of the crystal palace, the glass-enclosed recesses outside, the black, forever depths of night. Why the beasts return? Has it occurred to you that it is because they must, that they are in us, in our genes, waiting to mutate because they are better? Has it occurred to you that there is no last beast? Charlatan, La Fortina screamed, his face crimson with anger. Idolin, Mondraini said, I'm afraid we must insist you end the lesson. You must agree, Colomon said timidly, fighting his eyes open against drunken stupor. Have you realized, Idolin continued, looking down lovingly at Mondraini, that this time there is no technology to battle fate with, that 1,000 years of soft forgetfulness has left you all like children, that this time there would be no last beast because there is nowhere left to run? Liar! La Fortina screeched, knocking his goblet over, watching a pool of thick rubies spread before him. End it, Idolin, Mondraini demanded. Yes, Idolin said. She reached down to Mondraini's face, cupping his chin with firm gentleness, turning his head aside to bare his neck. She smiled wide to show them. This time, children, she said, somewhere in the midst of screams, as the real distant moon and the stars once more became the color of blood, the lesson is learned forever. End of Red Eve. I like this one more. Though I am frustrated that the only characteristic, the one of the only ladies in the story had was having breasts and liking to show them. But that's a small critique. The rest of it was cool. It was interesting. I like the idea of, I don't know, are we human at that point? Are they vampires? It's hard to tell, actually, if our characters are humans who escaped Earth to live above the moon and or on the moon, or if they're vampires living there or something. I don't know. It was interesting. I don't really have a lot to say about that one. Sometimes I'm not sure if I'm kind of confused by a story, if the problem is me just not being smart enough to understand it, or if it's just a little bit too convoluted for other people to understand. Someone out there loves this story, and you know what? Good for them. I hope you found your comfort story. Okay. Yeah, like I said, not much to say about that one. It's cool, though. Very sci-fi. This next one is short, and then I am going to log off because the pain is starting to increase. And I will have to deal with it. Sorry, I'm stretching. Okay, one more story, you guys. Let's see. We Are Dead Together by Charles de Lint. which may be a name you know. It's one of the only ones that I know from this anthology. The ideal condition would be, I admit, that men should be right by instinct. But since we are all likely to go astray, the reasonable thing is to learn from those who can teach. Sophocles. Sophocles. Oh, right. I forgot to write a warning on the top so I'd remember. I don't know what ethnicity and or race Charles de Lint is, but the main character in the story is Romani, but they go by the word gypsy, which is considered a slur. I wouldn't normally use it, and I am going to skip using it, but I just wanted to be clear at the start, and the best way to be the most clear is to just use the word instead of hopping around it and confusing people who don't understand that it's a slur these days. But it is considered one, and I like to be respectful of that. So, yeah. I forget why I mentioned the race of the author. Oh, right, because if it was like a story about being Romani written by someone who is in that way, I'd maybe feel more comfortable saying it, but I don't think he is, and therefore I still do not feel it. So, yeah, back to the story. Okay. Let it be recounted in the Swato, the stories of my people that chronicle our history and keep it alive, that while Kata Peloto was first and foremost a fool, she meant well. I truly believed there was a road I could walk between the world of the Ram and the Shilmulo. We have always been an adaptable people. We'd already lived side by side in the Gaji for 10 times 100 years, a part of their society and yet apart from it. The undead were just another kind of non-Romani. Why shouldn't we be able to exist with them as well? I knew now. I had always known. We didn't call them the Shulmulo, the cold dead, simply for the touch of their pale flesh, cold as marble. Their hearts were cold too, cold and black as the hoarfrost that rimmed the hedges by which my ancestors had camped in gentler times. I had always known, and I had chosen to forget. I had let the chance for survival seduce me. And I don't know if I want to attempt to say this sentence that is not in English. Yeka buliasa nashti veshes pedan grasande. Sorry. Was what Bebi Eula used to tell us when we were children. With one behind, you cannot sit on two horses. It was an old saying, a warning to those Ram who thought they could be both Ram and Gaji, but instead were neither. I had ridden two horses these past few years, but all my cleverness served me ill in the end, for they took Budo from me all the same. Took him, stole his life, and left me with his cold, pale corpse that would rise from its death tonight to be forever a part of their world and lost to mine. For see, the Shilmulo have no art. The muses that inspire the living can't find lodging in their dead flesh, can't spark the fires of genius in their cold hearts. The Shilmulo can mimic, but they can't create. There are no Rembrandts counted in their ranks, no Picassos, no Yeatses, no Steinbecks, no Mozarts, no Dylans. For artwork, for music, for plays and films, and poetry and books, they need the living, Ram or Gaji. I'm not the best musician in this new world that the Shilmulo tore from the grave of the old, but I am something not one of them can ever possess except vicariously. I have the talent to compose. I have written hundreds of manuscripts in honor of my patron, Brian Stansford. Yes, that Stansford, the president of Stansford Chemicals, and every style of music. There are sonatas bearing his name and various music hall songs, jazz improvisations, 3 concertos, 1 symphony, and numerous airs in the traditional style of the Ram, rap music, pop songs, heavy metal anthems. I have accompanied him to dinners and galas and openings where my performances and music have always gained him the envy of his peers. In return, like any pet, I was given safety, both for myself and my family. Every member of the Pilato clan has the Stansford tattoo on their left brow, an ornate capital S, decorated with flowered vines with a tiny wolf's paw print enclosed on the lower curve of the letter. 16 petals. I'm struggling. I'm sorry. Oh my god. Okay. My brain is mush. 16 petalos could walk freely in the city and countryside with that mark on their brow. Only Baby Eula, my aunt, refused the tattoo. You do this for us, she told me, but I will not be an obligation on any member of my clan. What you do is wrong. We must forget the boundaries that lie between ourselves and the Gaji, and be united against our common enemy. To look out only for yourself, your family, makes you no better than the Shilmulo themselves. There is no other way, I had explained. Either I do this or we die. There are worse things than death, she told me. What you mean to do is one of them. You will lose your soul, Kata. You will become as cold in your heart as those you serve. I tried to explain it better, but she would not argue further with me at that time. She had the final word. She was an old woman, in her 80s, Papa said, but she killed 3 Shumulo before she herself was slain. We all knew she was brave, but not one of us learned the lesson she'd given her life to tell us. 16 petalos allowed the blood-red Stansford tattoo to be placed on their brows. I feel like I've said that name 3 different times. It's all the same surname, I promise. I'm sorry. But now there are only 15 of us. For protected though he was, 3 Shumulo stole Budo from me. Stansford himself spoke to me, explaining how it was an unfortunate accident. They were young, Budo's murderers. They hadn't seen the tattoo until it was too late. Perhaps I would now do as he had previously suggested and bring my family to live in one of his protective enclaves. We are Rom, I had said. He gave me a blank look. I'm a busy man, Kathy, he said, calling me by my Gajikano, my non-Romani name. Would you get to the point? It should have explained everything. To me, oh my god. It should have explained everything. To be Rom was to live in all places. Without freedom of movement, we might as well be dead. I wanted to explain it to him, but the words wouldn't come. Stansford regarded me, his flesh white in the fluorescent light as it lit his office. Small sparks of red fire deep in his pupils. If I had thought he would have any sympathy, I was sorely mistaken. Let Taylor know when you've picked a new mate, was all he said, and we'll have him, or her, tattooed. Then he bent down to his paperwork as though I were no longer present. I had been dismissed. I sat for a long moment, ignored, finally learning to hate him, before I left his office and went back downtown to the small apartment in a deserted tenement where Budo and I had been staying this week. Budo lay stretched out on newspapers before the large window in the living room where Taylor and another of Stansford men had left him 2 days ago. I knelt beside the corpse and looked down at what had been my husband. His throat had been savaged, but otherwise he looked as peaceful as though he were sleeping. His eyes were closed. A lock of his dark hair fell across his brow. I pushed it aside, laid a hand on his cold flesh. He was dead, but not dead. He had been killed at 3 a.m., tonight at the same time. 3 days after his death, his eyes would open, and if I was still here, he would not remember me. They never remember anything until that initial thirst is slaked. His skin was almost translucent. Pale, far too pale. Where was the dark-skinned Budo I had married? Gone, dead. All that remained of him was this bitter memory of pale flesh. I was wrong, I said. I spoke neither to myself nor to the corpse. My voice was for the ghost of my aunt, Bebi Eula, gone to the land of shadows. Budo would never take that journey, not if I let him wake. I lifted my gaze to look out through the window at the street below. Night lay dark on its pavement. Shilmulo didn't need streetlights, and what humans remain in the city know better than to walk out of doors once the sun has gone down. The emptiness I saw below echoed endlessly inside me. I rose to my feet and crossed the room to where our 2 canvas backpacks lay against the wall. My fiddle case lay between them. I opened it and took out the fiddle. When I ran my thumb across the strings, the notes seemed to be swallowed by the room. They had no ring, no echo. Budo's death had stolen their music. For a long moment, I held the fiddle against my chest. Then I took the instrument by its neck and smashed it against the wall. The strings popped free as the body shattered, the end of one of them licking out to sting my cheek. It drew blood. I took the fiddle's neck back to where Budo's corpse lay and knelt beside him again. Raising it high above my head, I brought the jagged end down, plunging it into his chest. There. The corpse bucked as though I'd struck it with an electric current. Its eyes flared open, gaze locking on mine. It was a stranger's gaze. The corpse's hands scrabbled weakly against my arms, but my leather jacket kept me safe from its nails. It was too soon for him to have reached the full power of the Shilmulo. His hands were weak. His eyes could glare, but not bend me to his will. It took longer for the corpse to die than I had thought it would. When it finally lay still, I leaned back on my heels, leaving the fiddle's neck sticking up out of the corpse's chest. I tried to summon tears. My sorrow ran deep. I had yet to cry, but the emptiness just gathered more thickly inside me. So I simply stared at my handiwork, sickened by what I saw, but forcing myself to look so that I would have the courage to finish the night's work. Bebi Eula had been a wealth of old sayings. Where you see Rom, she had once said, there is freedom. Where you do not, there is no freedom. I had traded our freedom for tattoos. Those tattoos did not mean safety, but precausa, misfortune, bad luck. We were no longer Rom, my family and I. But only Bebi Eula had seen that, until now. I had a recital the following night, at a gala at Stansford's at the Brewer Theater. There was a seating capacity of 500, and, knowing Stansford, he would make certain that every seat was filled. I walked from the tenement with my fiddle case in hand. A new piece I'd composed for Stansford that week was to be the finale, so I didn't have to be at the theater until late, but I was going early. I stopped only once along the way to meet my brother, Vedel. I had explained my needs to him the day before. It's about time, had been his only response. I remembered Bebi Eula telling me she would not be an obligation on any member of her clan, and wondered if the rest of my family agreed with her, the way that Vedel seemed to. I had always told myself I did what I did for them. Now I had learned that I had been for myself. I wanted to live. I could not bear to have my family unprotected. Many of the legends that tell of the Shilmulo are false or embroidered, but this was true. There are only 3 ways to kill them: by beheading, by a stake in the heart, and by fire. What Vedel brought me was an explosive device he'd gotten from a member of the local Gaji freedom fighters. It was small enough to fit in my empty fiddle case, but with a firepower large enough to bring down the house. 500 would burn in the ensuing inferno. It would not be enough, but it was all I could do. I embraced Vedel, there on the street, death lying in its case at my feet. We are Rom, he whispered into my hair. We are meant to be free. I nodded, slowly stepping back from him. I picked up the case and went on alone to the theater. I would not return. Let it be recounted in the Swato that while Kata Petolo was first and foremost a fool, she meant well. Even a fool can learn wisdom, but oh, the lesson is hard. End of We Are Dead Together. And that's the end of the night's readings. And I like that one the best. I very much do. Yeah. I hope you guys liked it. If you're here, thank you. If you made it to the end, thank you. I like to do these streams every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. My God, my brain is fried. I'm going to bed. Okay. Again, thank you for being here. I'll probably do I'm doing something on Wednesday, but I'm too tired to talk about it. See you around.